The courtroom was already tense before a single word was spoken. The air felt thick, like everyone inside knew something explosive was about to happen. Wooden benches creaked as spectators shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another while cameras quietly rolled. At the center of it all sat a young man in an expensive tailored suit, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes filled with open defiance. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look worried. In fact, he looked annoyed, as if being there was beneath him. This was not the posture of someone afraid of consequences. This was the posture of someone who had never faced them. The bailiff called the case, and as the defendant's name echoed through the courtroom, the young man scoffed under his breath. A smirk tugged at his lips, and he leaned back in his chair like he was settling into a private lounge instead of a courtroom. From the gallery, a few people exchanged looks. Some shook their heads. Others leaned forward, sensing drama. Because everyone knew who he was. The mayor's son. Privilege followed him like a shadow. It always had. Teachers let things slide. Police officers issued warnings instead of citations. Rules bent when his name was mentioned. Consequences somehow never stuck. Until now. The charges were read aloud. Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and verbal threats made toward a law enforcement officer. Each accusation landed with a dull thud in the room, but the defendant barely reacted. He rolled his eyes, exhaling loudly, tapping his manicured fingers against the table. When the judge entered, the room stood. Judge Judy took her seat with a sharp, practiced motion, her expression unreadable, but alert. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She simply looked out over the courtroom, eyes scanning faces with a precision that made even seasoned attorneys straighten in their seats. Her gaze lingered for just a moment longer on the defendant. He didn't stand quite fast enough. That alone was enough to raise an eyebrow. Sit, she said curtly. Once everyone complied, the case began routinely enough. The prosecutor outlined the incident: a late-night traffic stop, an argument, insults hurled at the officer, refusal to comply, and a scene that escalated quickly. According to the report, the defendant had shouted loudly enough to draw a crowd, repeatedly invoking his father's position as mayor. But when it was time for the defendant to speak, routine flew straight out the window. He leaned forward, scoffing openly now, and waved a dismissive hand. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice loud, arrogant, dripping with disbelief. "None of this should even be happening." Judge Judy raised her hand. "Do not interrupt," she warned. He ignored it. "I mean, come on," he continued, laughing under his breath. "This officer had no right to touch me. And honestly, this whole thing is a joke." "My father—" "Stop," Judge Judy snapped. The room went silent. He froze, mid-sentence, but only for a second. His lips pressed together, irritation flashing across his face. Clearly, he wasn't used to being cut off. Still, he leaned back again, shaking his head like a scolded child rather than a grown man in court. Judge Judy stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, calm but razor-sharp. "You will speak when spoken to, and when you do, you will do so respectfully." He smirked. That smirk said everything. The judge turned to the prosecutor, motioning for them to continue. As testimony unfolded, the officer involved was called to the stand. He spoke clearly, calmly, recounting the night step by step. The traffic violation, the refusal to provide identification, the sudden shift in tone when the defendant realized he was being cited. He became verbally aggressive, the officer said, raised his voice, drew attention, repeatedly told me I couldn't arrest him. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "And what reason did he give?" she asked. The officer hesitated for a fraction of a second. "He said his father was the mayor." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Judge Judy turned her eyes back to the defendant. His confidence didn't waver. When it was finally his turn to respond, he stood abruptly, not waiting for permission. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said loudly. "This officer was on a power trip. Everyone knows who my family is. I wasn't resisting anything. I was being harassed. You were screaming, the officer said calmly. I was upset. The defendant shot back. Big difference. Judge Judy raised a finger. Sit down, she ordered. He hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face, slowly. He sat. Judge Judy's voice remained even. But something had shifted. You believe, she said, that your last name places you above the law. That's not what I said, he replied quickly. That is exactly what you said, she countered. You said you couldn't be arrested. He shrugged. Because I shouldn't have been. The judge exhaled through her nose. A small but telling gesture. Young man, she said, this courtroom is not impressed by who your father is. A few quiet murmurs of approval came from the gallery. The defendant scoffed again, glancing around like he expected support. Instead, he found none. Judge Judy continued. You seem to believe authority belongs to you by inheritance. That rules are optional. That tone, behavior, and compliance are for other people. That's not fair, he snapped. I didn't ask for your opinion, she replied. Instantly, that earned a sharp intake of breath from the audience. The defendant clenched his jaw, anger rising now, ego bruised. His foot bounced under the table, irritation turning into something closer to panic, though he wouldn't admit it. Judge Judy folded her hands. You walked into this courtroom believing you were untouchable, she said. You are not. Silence stretched. And for the first time, the mayor's son looked unsure whether his confidence would survive what was coming next. The judge glanced down at the file once more, then back up at him. And we are just getting started. The confidence he'd walked in with hadn't vanished yet, but it was beginning to wobble. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet that followed her last sentence was heavier than shouting ever could be. The defendant shifted in his chair, straightening his suit jacket as if adjusting his appearance might restore control. It didn't. The judge turned her attention back to the prosecutor. Proceed. The prosecutor stood and nodded. Your Honor, at this time we'd like to introduce video evidence from the officer's body camera. The defendant's head snapped up. What video? He asked sharply. Judge Judy didn't look at him. You will remain silent. A large monitor was wheeled into view. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and every set of eyes locked onto the footage. The video began innocently, enough streetlights glowing, the sound of traffic in the distance. The officer's voice was calm as he explained the reason for the stop. Then the camera turned, and there he was, the same young man, but without the polished courtroom composure. His posture was aggressive, his voice louder, his words sharper. Do you have any idea who my father is? The voice echoed through the room. A few spectators murmured quietly. The video continued. I don't have to listen to you, the defendant's recorded voice barked. You can't arrest me. This is going to disappear by morning. The courtroom stayed silent, but the shift was unmistakable. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving the screen. The officer in the video asked for identification again. The defendant laughed. No, he said. Call your supervisor. You're making a mistake. The video showed him stepping closer, finger pointing, tone escalating. Every word contradicted his earlier testimony. Every second chipped away at the image he'd tried to present. When the video ended, the screen went black. The lights came back on. Judge Judy turned slowly toward the defense table. Well, she asked. The defendant swallowed. That video doesn't show the whole situation, he said quickly. It was taken out of context. Out of context? Judge Judy repeated. Yes, he insisted. I was provoked. The officer was rude from the beginning. The officer didn't react. He didn't need to. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly. The context, she said, is that you were stopped for a traffic violation and responded by attempting to intimidate a police officer using your father's position. That's not intimidation, the defendant snapped. That's explaining who I am. Judge Judy's eyes hardened. Who you are, she repeated slowly, is a citizen. The word landed hard. You are not royalty. she continued. You are not exempt. You are not above the law, and you do not get to decide which rules apply to you. The defendant shifted again, his foot tapping faster now. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a tight, defensive expression. My father serves this city, he said. He's worked hard for his reputation. So have many people, Judge Judy replied. And none of them are sitting here arguing that their family name cancels out their behavior. She turned back to the officer. Did you at any point raise your voice or threaten the defendant prior to his outburst? No, Your Honor, the officer answered. Did you treat him differently once he mentioned his father? Yes, the officer said. The defendant's eyebrows lifted, a hint of triumph flashing. I became more cautious, the officer continued, because people who believe they're untouchable often escalate. A quiet wave of approval passed through the gallery. The defendant clenched his fists. Judge Judy nodded once. That aligns with what I observed. She turned back to him. You accused this officer of harassment. The video shows restraint. You claimed you were calm. The video shows hostility. You said you didn't resist. The video shows refusal and aggression. He opened his mouth to interrupt. Judge Judy raised a single finger. Do not, she warned. He closed his mouth. The judge folded her hands again. What concerns me most, she said, is not that you broke the law. People do that every day. The defendant looked up, confused. It's that you genuinely believed consequences would not apply to you. Her voice sharpened. You weren't scared. You weren't confused. You were confident that someone else would clean up your mess. The defendant shook his head. That's not true. Then explain, she said, why you said, this will disappear by morning. He hesitated. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? She pressed. He looked toward the gallery, toward the cameras, toward the reality setting in. I was upset, he muttered. Judge Judy leaned forward. No, she said. You were entitled. The word hit harder than any accusation so far. The defendant's face flushed. You're twisting this. I'm clarifying it, she replied. For you, and for anyone watching who thinks power is inherited instead of earned. The courtroom felt smaller now, tighter. Judge Judy glanced at the file once more. Before I rule, she said, there's one more matter we need to address. The defendant's eyes widened slightly. What matter? He asked. She looked directly at him. Your behavior in this courtroom. His heart visibly sank. You interrupted repeatedly. You spoke without permission. You showed open disrespect. I was defending myself, he protested. You were undermining the court, she corrected. The judge paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. And that, she said calmly, is not something I take lightly. The defendant leaned back slowly, realizing for the first time that this wasn't a performance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning. Judge Judy straightened in her chair. And now, she said, we are going to discuss consequences. The room held its breath. The word consequences hung in the air like a verdict already decided. The defendant sat stiffly, shoulders tight, eyes darting as if he were searching for an exit that didn't exist. The confidence he once wore so easily had drained away, replaced by a nervous tension he couldn't hide no matter how carefully his suit was pressed. Judge Judy adjusted the papers in front of her, not rushing, letting the silence do its work. You have been given every opportunity to explain yourself, she said. And with each opportunity, you chose arrogance over accountability. He shook his head, jaw clenched. That's not fair. She looked up instantly. I am not here to be fair to your ego. I am here to apply the law. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Judy continued. This court does not punish status. It punishes behavior. And your behavior both during the incident and today demonstrates a profound lack of respect for authority. I respect authority, he snapped. I just don't respect abuse of it. Her eyes narrowed. Authority is not abuse simply because it inconveniences you. He opened his mouth, then stopped himself. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. Judge Judy leaned back, her voice calm but firm. You weren't confused that night. You weren't afraid. You were emboldened. She flipped a page in the file. You challenged the officer. You challenged the process. And today, you challenged this court. The defendant swallowed hard. I want to be clear, she said. This has nothing to do with who your father is. Relief flickered across his face. However, she continued, you made it about him. The relief vanished. You repeatedly invoked his position as a shield, she said. And when that shield failed, you grew louder, not wiser. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't think it would go this far. That, Judge Judy replied, is the problem. The courtroom was silent now, every ear tuned to the unraveling. You assumed someone else would intervene, she said. That your name would smooth things over. That accountability was optional. She paused. This court exists precisely because it is not optional. The defendant stared at the table. Blinking rapidly, Judge Judy turned toward the prosecutor. Has the city submitted the supplemental report? Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied, standing. It details prior incidents involving the defendant. The defendant's head shot up. Prior incidents. Judge Judy held up a hand. Sit, the prosecutor continued. 3 prior traffic stops. 2 warnings for disorderly conduct. All dismissed without charges. The courtroom reacted instantly. Whispers filled the air. The defendant's face flushed deep red. Those were nothing, he said. I was never convicted of anything. Because nothing stuck, Judge Judy said. Not because nothing happened. She looked at him steadily. Patterns matter. His voice dropped. You're making me sound like a criminal. No, she said. I'm making you sound uncorrected. The words cut deep. Judge Judy folded her hands. Each time, someone stepped in. Each time, consequences were softened. And each time, the message she received was that behavior like yours had no cost. He shook his head slowly. That's not my fault. It becomes your fault, she replied, when you rely on it. The defendant's eyes glistened now. His composure was slipping, piece by piece. Judge Judy glanced toward the gallery. There are young people watching this, she said. People who believe connections matter more than character. She turned back to him. Today, they are learning otherwise. His breathing grew shallow. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied, that your father's name does not protect you here. A pause. In fact, she continued, it heightens my concern. His head snapped up. How? Because you were raised with access, she said. With opportunity? With examples of public responsibility. Her voice sharpened slightly. And you chose entitlement instead. The defendant wiped his palms against his pants. Panic setting in. You had every reason to know better, Judge Judy said. And instead, you acted worse. He stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. The bailiff stepped forward instantly. Sit down, Judge Judy ordered, her voice cutting through the movement. He froze, then slowly sat, breathing hard. That outburst, she said calmly, just confirmed everything. The courtroom was completely still now. Judge Judy leaned forward. You are not being punished for who your father is. She paused. You are being held accountable because of who you are. The defendant stared at her, eyes wide, realization crashing over him. Judge Judy straightened, her expression resolute. I have reached my decision. The words felt final. The defendant's shoulders slumped. Whatever outcome he had expected walking into that courtroom, this wasn't it. And the most devastating realization of all settled in. His last name wasn't saving him. It was sealing his fate. The courtroom felt impossibly quiet as Judge Judy prepared to speak. No one shifted. No one whispered. Even the camera seemed to hum more softly, as if the room itself understood the weight of what was coming next. The defendant sat motionless, his earlier defiance completely gone. His shoulders were slumped now, his hands resting uselessly on the table in front of him. The man who once believed he could talk his way out of anything was finally out of words. Judge Judy looked directly at him. You came into this courtroom convinced of one thing, she said evenly, that this process was a formality, that the outcome was already decided. She paused. You were wrong. The defendant swallowed hard. This court does not exist to protect reputations, she continued. It exists to protect the rule of law. She reached for her pen. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony of the officer, and your conduct both during the incident and today, I find you fully responsible for your actions. His breath caught. For disorderly conduct, she said. You are fined the maximum allowed. A quiet reaction moved through the gallery. For resisting arrest, she continued. You are sentenced to community service. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed forward. And for your repeated attempts to intimidate law enforcement and undermine this court, Judge Judy said. You will attend a mandatory behavioral accountability program. The defendant exhaled sharply, disbelief flickering across his face. You will also issue a written apology to the officer involved, she added, acknowledging your misconduct and your misuse of influence. His face burned red. Judge Judy set the pen down. Let me be very clear, she said. These consequences are not excessive. In fact, they are measured. She leaned forward. What would have been excessive, she continued, would have been allowing this pattern to continue. The defendant finally looked up. You embarrassed yourself today, she said calmly. But embarrassment fades. Her voice softened just slightly. What lasts is character. He blinked rapidly, struggling to hold himself together. You have spent your life confusing access with authority, she said. They are not the same. Judge Judy glanced briefly toward the gallery, then back at him. Your father holds a public office, she said. That role exists to serve people, not to shield family members from responsibility. The defendant's lips trembled. Every time you invoked his name, she continued, you dishonored the position he holds. That was the moment his composure finally broke. His eyes dropped to the table. His shoulders sagged completely. The truth he had avoided for years had finally cornered him, and there was nowhere left to hide. Judge Judy straightened in her chair. This case is not about punishment, she said. It is about correction. She pointed gently toward him. You are here because someone failed to tell you no when it mattered. She paused, letting the words sink in. Today, that changes. The bailiff stepped forward as Judge Judy concluded. You will comply with this ruling in full, she said. Failure to do so will result in further legal action. She looked at him one last time. You are free to go. The defendant stood slowly, legs unsteady. He didn't look toward the cameras. He didn't look toward the audience. He simply walked out. The courtroom remained silent for a moment after he was gone. Then Judge Judy addressed the room. Privilege does not excuse misconduct, she said, and power does not pass through bloodlines. She struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. As people rose from their seats, one truth lingered long after the doors closed. The mayor's son had entered believing he was untouchable. He left knowing something far more powerful than his name existed: the law. And this time, it spoke louder than privilege ever could.